just as I have a dream that my poor little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
You're listening to the words of Dr. Martin Luther King from 50 years ago today.
50 years ago, nearly 250,000 people got out and walked in what is now known as the March on Washington. Our nation is remembering Dr. Martin Luther King's dream about racial justice, jobs, and freedom. And
joining us now is Reverend Talbert Swan. He's from the Spring of Hope Church in Springfield. We're going to talk a little bit more about the march and its continued importance today. Reverend, if you wouldn't mind, take us to that day. I know none of us were there, but what was it like? Because it's such a monumental day in history, but often, you don't realize it until it's over.
Well, the climate of what was going on in the nation is what's important to remember. They were in the midst of a civil rights movement. You had the events of 1955, the Montgomery bus boycott, the death of Emmett Till. You had pending legislation on civil rights. You had conversations around the voting rights. And so you had this swell of people that had concerns about injustice in America. And you had 6 major leaders that came together to organize this March on Washington, something President Kennedy originally tried to discourage. But after meeting with what we call the Big Six, they got his cooperation around the march, and they wanted to come and bring attention to the issues of concern during that day.
Now, today is the 50th anniversary of that day. And why is it so important that we always commemorate and celebrate what Martin Luther King did and said?
Well, I think it's important to note that though that was 50 years ago, there are some of the impending concerns that they had that we still have today. Though a lot of progress has been made, they went to Washington to talk about jobs and justice. 50 years later, we still have that major concern, particularly in communities of color. When you look at the unemployment rate nationally, it's 7.6%. In the African American community, it's nearly 13%. So there's still a concern about jobs. There's still a concern about justice. When we look at the Trayvon Martin cases and other cases like that, that's still foremost in the minds of people of color and people across the nation.
And I think because of that, too, it's so important that we don't forget about the speech like this, because not only the I Have a Dream speech, but all the rhetoric behind the civil rights movement is still at the forefront of our thoughts today, because we aren't there yet. And it's not just a color issue, it's a sexuality issue. There's so much to go, and I feel like we need to remember these words so that we can keep making those changes.
Absolutely. You bring up a good point, Seth. We haven't got there yet. One of the things that Dr. King said in his speech that isn't highlighted a lot, he said that America has bounced a check. In essence, it's been marked insufficient funds. The promise of freedom and justice, America has not kept that promise. And one of the things that was said at the recent anniversary of the March on Washington was that that check was redeposited, and this time they put a stop payment on it. And so we've got to look at the fact that America still has to live up to its promise of freedom, justice, and equality for all people. We're not there yet, and so we have to keep on moving, and we have to keep on marching, and we have to keep on pushing the issues that they pushed 50 years ago.
And I think it's amazing, no matter how many times you hear that speech and hear his voice and hear those words, it moves you every time. There's something about his passion, and it really does make us as Americans, I hope, want to make a change.
Absolutely. I mean, Dr. King was a great orator. He had great rhetoric. I mean, there were other speakers at that march. John Lewis, who spoke at the recent anniversary, was one of the speakers, the only living one left. But you can't get rid of the indelible imprint that the I Have a Dream speech left on America. And I think that America's mission now is to move from the dream into reality.
Well, let's talk about that mission, because that's the thing. People talk about it all the time, but it's so hard to get moving. What do you think are some tactile things that people can do, maybe start today? Because, one person can't change the world, but they can sure as heck try.
Absolutely. I think first and foremost, we've got to really keep the dialogue open. And we've got to be honest and candid when we have conversations about the state of racial relations in America. I think we do ourselves a disservice when we say that was the past, this is now, and we try to pretend that we've arrived at some utopia, some post-racial America. We're not there yet. And when we deal with things from that perspective, it's counterproductive. And we find ourselves in a very divided America where you have people on one side, others on the other side. And all you have to do is look at the Trayvon Martin case and see how diametrically opposed segments of America was on that particular case. I think we've got to continue to talk about the issues and be honest about them.
Absolutely.
And honest about the history of America.
And we appreciate you being here to talk about this today. And not to put you on the spot, Reverend Swan, but we are asking people, NBC is encouraging people to share what their dream is. And if you were to complete the statement, I have a dream that, what would be your dream for our nation?
Well, I have a dream that America is willing to be open and honest about her history and to deal with that issue in a very candid way. And I think that unless we're willing to talk about it and really deal with it and really deal with people's pain about what they've been through, then we're going to stay stuck in a divided America.
Dr. Swan, thank you. Dr. Swan had a tremendous example, but that's what we want to put it to you now. We want you to